This podcast is part of the Frederick Podcast Network. Learn more at listenfrederick.com.
Welcome back to Mental Health and Me. Thanks for tuning in today. As some of you know, I've been a clinician in private practice for 12 years now, and I've worked with a variety of different issues, and I'm trained in a variety of modalities for mental health, but something I get asked a lot is about addictions. And what I have to tell people is that the truth and the statistics and what we know about addictions is that 1 hour outpatient weekly therapy is not the way to go to help someone who is suffering from some form of addiction. So that isn't an area that I am super well skilled in working. However, I was able to connect with Tom Herb from the HOFFA Foundation, and he came into the studio today to tell us a little bit about some resources that are available to people who are struggling with addictions. How are you doing today, Tom?
Doing great, Natalie. Thank you very much for having me on today.
Yeah, thanks for coming in. I'm excited to hear about this foundation because, like I said, this isn't an area that I typically work in, but it has certainly come up in the 12 years that I've been a clinician. And so we know it's a problem. We know that there's a need for services, and people often don't know what to do if they have a loved one who's struggling or if they are struggling themselves. And we get calls where I work sometimes, and it's just not a resource that we offer. So could you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to start the HOFFA Foundation?
For sure. So the driving force behind the HOFFA Foundation started in August of 2019. It was August 18th, 2019 to be exact. A Sunday morning, I'll never forget, when I was on my way to the airport to BWI and got the phone call that no one wants to receive from their mother that her son, my brother, was found dead that morning from an overdose. And so, you know, the challenges we faced as a family leading up to his death tied directly into the resources. I would say in some cases, lack of resources, not understanding where to go, where to get started as a family. It was something that, you know, we weren't really used to, and it created a challenge, so much so that it took us a while to find a place for my brother to get into. And the Friday he was supposed to go into the facility to start his treatment program, obviously, you know, a lot of times folks will have one more big hurrah, they say, and go out and, you know, have that good time. And by the time we found him, he was already gone. So that moment, you know, when he passed away, it wasn't too long after that first it was myself on my own, like, we've got to do something in our community to make a difference, make an impact. It's very much needed. And quickly that created some momentum with other family members and friends to form the HOFFA Foundation, who we are today.
Wow. Yeah, I'd say at this point, it's pretty hard to find someone who doesn't know someone who struggled with addiction. It has just become such a large part of our culture and such an accessible outlet for people that it's hard to imagine that anybody doesn't know somebody who's struggled. And you brought up a great point about it took a while when you were looking for a facility for your brother. And how long do you think he struggled with his addiction?
He struggled for a couple of years. And I would say in his last year, that's when things really started to escalate. It all started when he got into a car accident, had a neck injury, was prescribed pain medication, right? And that pain medication ultimately led to his addiction. And when things happened with, you know, the medication to where they couldn't receive the amounts they were once receiving, they went to the more, you know, the things on the street. And, you know, in the end, fentanyl is what got him.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And your story of your brother is very similar. I'm sure the listener or many of other listeners will relate to that, because that's often how people end up in these situations, is that it wasn't intentional. It wasn't something they initially sought out, but something put that as a coping mechanism, and they didn't know how to pull back from that when it was no longer available.
Yeah. Yeah, it's you know, it's one of those things where I'll go back and read text messages he was sending me, you know, several weeks and months leading up to him passing, on how bad he wanted to get the help. And of course, you know, he didn't obviously want to die. No one wants to die, right? I mean, he kept telling me, you know, he's sick and tired of being sick and tired. right? And so, you're right. It's a disease that does not discriminate. It impacts all walks of life. Doesn't matter where you come from, what you look like, how much money you make. None of that stuff matters. Once it sinks its teeth into you, it is a tough road to hoe, and it takes a lot of support. It takes a lot of accountability. It takes just awareness and people and a team. I call it the ecosystem. It's not one thing; it's multiple things that have to come together. To make that difference and impact to where someone can turn their life around, get into recovery, right, and live that life free of the grips of the addiction. And it never goes away. We know that, right?
Right.
But having the resources, the system, and people wrapped around you for the rest of your life and make an impact to others, that's the ultimate goal and the mission that we're on.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And what we know is that we don't eliminate behaviors, we replace them. And so just telling someone, well, just don't do it, that's never going to work. It's not how we're wired. And so you, I guess, envisioned this retreat center, or maybe I shouldn't call it that. I'm not sure. When you envisioned this center, what did you hope that it would do? Like, what kind of impact were you hoping that it would have?
For sure. So when we opened up the HOFFA House, it's a men's recovery residence. Our number one objective, hands down, knowing that my family, mother, father, others are involved, plus friends, was that we didn't want someone else to have to bury their son or their brother or their uncle or their cousin. Like what we went through as a family, no one deserves to go through that. I always tell people, you do not want to be in this club. This is not, a club that anyone deserves to be in. So that's the number one objective, is to ensure that, we can save lives out there in the community, make a difference, get people back on their feet, productive members of society again, live a good life, rebuild their family, and just get out of the terrible place that they're in. So that was the number one goal from the beginning.
Does your organization have like a mission statement or a guiding philosophy?
Yes. So, our objective, as an organization, is certainly want to improve the Recovery Capital Index and strengthen the local recovery ecosystem. So I'd say ultimately that's our overarching mission. And so there's a lot inside of that. The ecosystem to me includes everything from what we do as an organization to provide housing. So the recovery residence is one thing. You got to factor in, obviously, treatment facilities as well. You've got to factor in other types of, resources and counseling and meetings and working a program and having a sponsor and doing all these things on top of transportation, something else that we do as well as an organization. So all of that has to work together as one cohesive unit in order to be successful. And that's just my opinion from what I've seen in my, last 4 years here in doing this. It takes all of that to come together, not just one thing.
Right. Okay. And could you tell the listener, if someone was to spend a day at the HOFFA House, what would that day look like? How would they go through a routine, or what would they be doing? Like, what happens to someone who becomes part of that organization?
Sure. So the HOFFA House, and I refer to it as a recovery residence because, working to break the stigma out there, part of it has to do with what we call certain things, right?
Okay.
Where some person might say, they're an addict, and I would say, well, there's someone that is struggling with, substance use disorder. Someone would say, well, that's, a halfway house. And I would say, well, this is actually a recovery residence. Some call it a sober living home, right? So there's different things that we have to work on as a community. But in the recovery residence that we have today, there are 7 men in the recovery house. That's our max capacity in the home. We made it clear that starting with my mother and others that, let's make it a home as if my brother was going there. We've seen other places where, they might have a house the size of ours, which is a decent sized home, and have, almost double the amount of people inside of it, right? And that's happening all over the place.
Right.
We wanted people to have their space, have their peace, of course, roof over their head, food on their plate, but there's also high levels of accountability. So one thing we did in the beginning through some good mentors of ours was we put policies and procedures in place around our house that follow a national organization called NARR, N-A-R-R. It's the National Association of Recovery Residences. There's approximately 30 chapters across the country, different states, and they make sure that, it is essentially the I'll call it the gold standard of sober living, right? Making sure everything that you do day in and day out, everything from just, resident safety to the programs you run, to the connection with the community, them getting back on their feet and obviously working out there and being productive, all kinds of things are come together. But we put those policies and procedures in place and made sure that, we are going to be a house that may be different than others out there, and that's okay. We show up every Monday night, have dinner with the residents. We have a meeting together. We built a new fitness center there on the property. We believe in physical health, impacts, of course, mental health. So maybe missed part of the answer to the question there, but a day in the life of someone at the recovery residence is that we expect everyone has a job, and they're working, and they're taking care of themselves. They're taking care of, obviously, their space, and just my big thing with the guys, too, is the culture has to be in a place where everybody's in this together. So we don't want someone coming in thinking that they're on their own island, trying to make it out, on their own or be by themselves. Like, it's got to feel like there's a family element, because we are family, right? That it was impacted. So we want the residents to feel like a part of our family too. And so, we're big on that, so yeah, it's one of those things where I would say it's just have structure, have a program, have a sponsor, go to meetings. We've got accountability, we've got process, and we've got good people. It usually doesn't take too long the first couple of days when someone's there and they feel kind of, awkward or out of place, that, they're not talking too much. They open up a few days into it and they're like, this is a good place to be. And that makes us feel good.
Yes. The last podcast I did on loneliness, and someone who had been previously addicted told me that when they were an addict, they had no problem finding friends. And so when you're walking away from that life, it can be very isolating and it can be a very lonely road. So I think something like that, I'm a fan of group therapy anyway, but when you have other people sort of trying to go that direction with you, there's a more likelihood of success. And then you don't have to be so lonely, because sometimes when someone's struggling with an addiction, their family is now done with them for many reasons, some that I very much understand. They may have become an unsafe person, and so their family's not interested in interacting with them anymore. But they have friends as long as they're an addict. If they choose to walk away from that, then they can be very alone. So I think it's great that your house allows people to have more of that family and community type of life.
Absolutely. And it's so important too, now, because, the connection piece, I know everyone in recovery, we're big on the connection piece, right? I mean, there's the quote out there that, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's the human connection. We've all heard that one. Most people that are in recovery have heard that statement. I'm a big believer in it. When it comes down to what's the secret sauce and what really matters and what works inside your home and inside of your, the program that you're putting together, for me, it's that genuine, authentic connection with another human being, making them feel like they're loved, we care about them, they have someone to lean into and talk to. And, you're going to be with these people for, we hope the rest of your life. Not necessarily the people in the recovery house, but people in recovery, just like you mentioned, people that are together when they're in active addiction, and then it becomes lonely when they, try to go out on their own and get out of it and break away from that. Well, that formation of people happens again in recovery, and it's important that you stay plugged in all along the way.
Yes.
So.
Okay. And if I was at the HOFFA Foundation, and you said you started in 2019, so you started at a time right before things probably became pretty complicated in 2020. But if I was there and sort of watched the umbrella of how this unfolded, what would you say were some of your biggest challenges?
Yeah, so in the beginning, because 2019, he passed away in August, we actually started the foundation with coffee. I know it sounds kind of, where are we going with this one? But my family owns a funeral home in Carroll County, the Zumbrun Funeral Home. And my brother's services were basically in his own home. So on one side of the building, it's residential. That's where we grew up. Family still lives there, my parents. And you go a door over and you're in the funeral home. So my brother was essentially laid out in his house. So we got to spend more time with him than most people do during that process, right? So we're usually on one side of the table helping other families out. Now we're on the other side as the family that needs the support. my last moment with my brother, the morning before I had to take him up to the crematory, had a cup of coffee in hand with my older brother standing there as well. And we put an empty mug on my brother's hand, a casket, kind of said our goodbyes. A few days later, I kind of thought about that moment, and coffee, of course, brings people together. We launched coffee called HOFFA Beans. So HOFFA Beans Coffee was born in October of 19. HOFFAbeans.org, great tasting coffee. All the proceeds, nonprofit, go to local organizations fighting addiction. Several months later, we had sold over 2,000 pounds, 25 different states, people getting behind the mission, and they loved the taste of our coffee, led to the community saying, you all should do something bigger. So it wasn't until late 2020 when we became an official foundation with a board, and our board members, we selected, we believe, see addiction through different lenses. So we have people on the board that are in recovery, people with kids in recovery, people that have, unfortunately, like us, lost loved ones, to get different points of views. And when we did that, to your point, right in the thick of 2020, we're thinking to ourselves, what can we do right now to make an immediate impact? We know that housing is still a gap out there. It's so important in that continuum that you have, that recovery house put together. So that was project number one. We bought the home this was early 21 in April. We opened up the HOFFA House in July of 21. So we're coming up on 4 years here in a few months. So there were challenges in the beginning just because it was all new to us, but we had to have a great house leader that's now the program coordinator for the foundation. Great story behind him and what's transpired in his life. Like I said, we had mentors out there that helped us put all of our policies and procedures in place. And yeah, we just got started, and dealt with all the challenges that we faced in 20 and 21.
And you brought up a great point, because starting something like this is going to come with challenges. And as a clinician, and I'm sure you'll relate to this, sometimes you are going all in, really working with someone, really hoping for the best, and then they experience a setback. And that can be very discouraging. But I want to make sure to highlight, was there a time that you knew your work was making a difference?
Absolutely. And it's a great point too, Natalie, because one of the things we had to prepare ourselves for, and the person that came in as our first house leader, first resident number one, he made it clear with our family that you're getting into something where you could perhaps experience what you just went through. That's the reality. Right. While you're looking for that, positive shining moment, the success story, know that there are going to be, more challenging situations. People are going to relapse. Right? People are going to struggle worse than they were prior to coming in here. People could potentially pass away like your son. Are you ready and prepared for that? And my family had to come together and say, let's do it. Like we've got to make sure we're helping others out. That's so important, right? We obviously can't rewind the hands of time with our son and brother, but let's help somebody else out. So, we got into it at that point. It wasn't too long into the HOFFA House when we had 7 men there in the beginning, where we started to see some bright moments. And obviously everything is fully confidential, but I will say there were people that came in that places where they came from, we heard there was some chatter that this person is never going to make the journey, right? They were betting against them. Yeah. And that happens all the time, that they're not going to make it. And slowly but surely, they start working their program. They get their sponsor. They're going to meetings. They're connecting with the guys in the house. And, they're 30 days sober. They won't make it past 60 days. They make it past 60. Next thing you know, 90. Next thing you know, 6 months go by. A year goes by. And they're transitioning out of the house, getting back on their feet, getting their car back, getting a house. In some cases, getting married. We've seen it. So there are those stories we've been hoping for have already occurred. And there's already been some challenging ones too. Like that's just a reality of it. So,
right.
And it makes us feel good to look at someone and know that, they put themselves in a position to where they can live a beautiful life from here on out. It's not easy. You have to stick to the plan, stick to the program, stay connected, but it's been good to see for sure.
How long can someone stay at a HOFFA House?
Great question, and here's why. This is one that is very personal to me because everyone has different opinions on this. I've made it clear from the beginning that the length of stay, there's not a set number ever, because I never want anyone to feel like, the hourglass is running out of sand,
Yeah.
If they're not ready and prepared, then obviously they need more time. With that being said, of course, making sure the right things are being put in place early. As I mentioned, getting your job, paying your bills, starting to save some money, right? Get ready and prepared along the way. But I never want to put a time frame on someone. So, other places you might talk to someone and they say, well, we expect people to be here no more than, 6 months, as an example, right? We've had people where they've been there for multiple years now. Not many, but some. And, so do we try to help them at a certain point transition out? The answer is always yes, but I don't want anyone to ever feel like they've got pressure on them,
That's a great perspective because everyone has different resources outside of your organization. So some people may have a family that they can go back to if they've chosen the path of sobriety, or they may have some other support system where others don't. I mean, it could be this or bust.
Oh, yeah. For sure. And that's the case for most of them. I mean, in many cases, to your point earlier, because of the challenges, when they were in active addiction and maybe some bridges got burnt along the way, we see bridges being rebuilt, right, that were burned down, which again is part of that shining moment to get their family back, to get their life back, to get their job back. I mean, and have somebody actually trust them again, to come into their home and maybe stay overnight, not think that something's going to happen if they're there. So yeah, I mean, in many situations, you got to think through, beyond the HOFFA House, that next step, what does it look like for that individual? And if it's going to be a situation where, they're going to be out on their own with limited people to connect to and resources, and it may be challenging for them to stay connected into our folks, like, we're not saying there's no chance there. There's always a chance. We just have to make sure we fully understand that,
Right. And what would you say to someone who loves somebody who is struggling with addiction and they struggle with the line of enabling them versus showing them love? Because I think people, particularly parents, walk this fine line of like, I can't turn my back on my child, but then, if you give them $20, they're going to spend it on drugs instead of food. So parents and other people who love someone struggling with addiction struggle with finding that line of like, what should I be doing versus when should I sort of let them fall?
Yeah, it's another good one. I mean, I would say this because I watched, of course, my mother go through it and others. You're always going to live with the woulda, coulda, shouldas,
Great point.
And so again, we can't rewind the hands of time. Unfortunately, we can't go back and change anything that was already, done or not done. What we can do is try to help others out, make them feel like, our lessons learned along the way. We can instill in them, and something that I believe a parent should not do is beat themselves up. If they know that they, certainly have done everything they possibly could to get them the resources and the things they need to get them on the best path. You got to do that. But when it comes to enabling them with, giving them money and giving them things, knowing that it's going to go to something else, like at some point you have to drive a stake in the ground. You got to know that I have to hold this person accountable. I have to hold myself accountable too, to make sure I don't fall into that. But you've got to, make sure that they realize like they have to make the decision to get out there and get the help that they need, right? Then to feel like it's on their own, we can support them, but the enablement piece is real. I've seen my own family and others go through it, and it's a tough situation. I've got an 18-year-old daughter now. She's going off to college here in a couple months, and all I can think about is when I went to college and the things that I did personally and beyond college and what's out there and, the risk. And if I were in the shoes of my mother or someone else, it'd be very difficult for me as a father not wanting to, provide my daughter. With that being said, in that specific situation, knowing what I know now, I would ensure that, when it comes to that, the enablement piece, that line in the sand or stake in the ground would have to be put in place soon, because you can't live with that the rest of your life, feeling that way. So.
Right.
Yeah.
And what would you say are maybe some common misconceptions about addiction that maybe not everyone understands, that you just wish more people got it?
Yeah. So one is, again, goes back to the earlier statement around if you think addiction isn't around you and you're safeguarded against it and you maybe you're part of the the reason why we have to work towards breaking the stigma, like you're fooling yourself. Like it's everywhere. It's in every single backyard in every county in our state in the entire country. It's everywhere. Right. And when I say it's everywhere, the obviously the alcohol, the drugs, all the things that create this situation are out there. And so you have to have, good awareness and just know that, don't have like don't turn your head or have the blind eye or whatever. I mean, you just got to be open to it and willing to talk about it, and have good, self-awareness as well. So I think it's not necessarily a misconception. I just think sometimes people are misinformed.
Yeah.
People don't, really want to believe that that's either them or their family member or their neighbor or their whatever. But again, you have to be real and know that it's out there. I also believe that, with addiction, I think people have a certain perception on what an addict looks like, right?
Right.
Kind of who they are. Oh, that person there, they look like they could be an addict. We hear it all the time, right?
Right.
And it really, that comment, if I'm around it, obviously I will address it in a professional way, but it does get my blood boiling a little bit, because that's someone's daughter right there. That's someone's, mother or father or whomever. Like, you don't know what they're going through.
Right.
So I think that's, something else that, again, may not be a misconception, maybe tied more to just misinformation and just, the reality of the situation. But there's all kinds of things that I've learned along the way. I mean, I call myself a rookie still in all this, even though I've been around it now for 4 years with the foundation and have been involved, immersed myself into a lot of different educational type things and different programs and people, learning something new every single day.
Yeah.
So yeah. I mean, it's not going away.
Right. I tell people sometimes when you think about addiction, and this is on a much more minor scale, but let me take your iPhone for the day.
Oh, yeah.
And you'll catch yourself being like, where's my phone? I need my phone. I can't check Facebook. I can't look at TikTok, like whatever it is. And sort of those little things, because our brain is rewired by our iPhone. We know this. That's why all of us are spending more time on our iPhones, and we probably should. But it's the same idea of the brain becomes rewired. And so the idea of just cold turkey stopping, does it happen? Yes. And I think people will say that, and it absolutely does. I've known people who cold turkey quit smoking. I don't know how they did it, but we do know that when someone is struggling with a substance, it is rewiring the brain. Now the brain can heal. There's a lot of hope for the brain healing, and a lot of new science has showed us with brain scans that post addiction behaviors, your brain can certainly heal. But I just try to bring that little point up of like, if I took your phone and you could not check your social media, your emails, your chest would probably tighten a little bit. And and so we see that just on a tiny minor scale. And so it's certainly amplified when someone is addicted to a substance of some sort.
Yeah. And so to that point, I think you just answered the question that you asked me, because I went down the lane of misinformation versus misconception. I think misconception is there are many people out there that believe addiction is a choice.
Right.
It's not a choice, right? I mean, no one's choosing to be an addict for anything, right? I mean, it's that's inside of us. It's our behavior. It's how we feel. And your example there is a great example I use as well with people that try to understand. It's like that example is perfect. People that are on their phone all day long, like many of us, right? We got to check it and stay. I call it the remote control to our lives. Everything's on that remote control, right? To keep us moving forward. But yeah, go put it away and lock it up for 24 hours. And every time you get that feeling like you want to go check it, you're starting to get the feeling of what it feels like to be, someone that's struggling with substance use disorder.
I'm really cognizant of my phone. I've got kids and I don't let them have phones. So I won't keep games or anything, like only if we're on an airplane will I have a game that I would play, because I have caught myself before that I was just playing it all the time, sort of mindlessly, and not realizing like, wait a minute, this is actually a problem. I'm just like so sucked into this game. And so for me, things like that, I try to guard that, but it is hard. If I have to actively turn my phone off, that's the only way I can stay away from it. I'm like, you know what? I don't need it for an hour. Off it goes.
Yeah.
And so those are kind of hard things to do, but especially when you have people who maybe even have like a monetary gain by you staying addicted to something, it can be really hard to distance yourself when your quote unquote friends are trying to sell you something for their own benefit. And it's causing you to go right back in that cycle or stay in that cycle because, you correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding they really need to break certain connections to maintain sobriety.
Absolutely. They always tell you that, it's people, places, and things, right? Those are the things you have to change up. It's the people that you were rolling around with, the places you were frequently, you were going to, things that you were doing. I mean, just doing a complete audit on all three buckets, people, places, and things, and making that complete shift. And in most cases, it's shifting away altogether. You've got to make that decision that these people you thought were your friends, the people that you're running around with, in the end, they're really not your friends, right? In many, if not all cases. So you've got to make that change. And then it becomes, okay, now what do I do? But there are a lot of people out there, right, that are, again, whether they're in recovery or not, that want to wrap their arms around you and help get you moving along. And once you get down to a certain point, and I don't know what that point is, right? But down the road, because I'm living it right now, when I stopped drinking alcohol over 4 years ago, my circle shifted. And you to the point where, you know what, your circles become smaller, but they're much better circles that you're in now.
Right. And we have things like alcohol are far more socially acceptable addictions. So we saw during COVID, we know statistically women in particular began drinking at an alarmingly higher rate. And we can understand that. We understand what spiked that. They were home all of a sudden trying to do 10 different jobs with their kids. And we saw like that population increase in that. But there's sort of a joke with it, right? Like mommy wine culture. It's very accepted. And we look at things like that and we say, does that person realize that they could not walk away from it? If I just all of a sudden took your alcohol, you'd probably be a little panicked.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And we all know it's normalized. It's in front of us every single day. It's on your phone, the ads, it's on billboards. You can't go to any celebration, pick it, right? It's a birthday party, it's an anniversary, it's a this, it's a that, where, at the front and center has to be the alcohol. Right. I mean, the themes of parties or events, even in the corporate world and work, there's a happy hour or there's a celebration for a big maybe they just, in business, something big happened. So let's pop the champagne and do that. Alcohol is everywhere.
Yeah. And if you go to a corporate event and don't drink, it's kind of awkward. Someone had told me that once. They're like, everybody asks you why you're not drinking.
Oh, yeah.
You can't just not get a drink. So they would get juice so that it looked like a drink, so people just would not say, why aren't you drinking, man?
Oh, yeah.
So it's sort of the only thing that comes with a question. If you don't eat meat, no one cares, but you don't drink alcohol at a corporate event, suddenly you're getting questioned.
Yeah. I was probably about, 90 days in my sobriety, and I was with a friend, and he had been sober for over 20 years, and we were riding in the same golf cart together. And I was struggling with that because I go to these events still and places, and people would, offer me a drink, and I'd say, no, I'm not drinking. He goes, you're messing up right there. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, if you told them you're not drinking, you're basically saying that just in that moment, at that point in time, you're not drinking. Change that to, I don't drink.
Okay.
Because when someone asks you, would you like a cocktail or this, that, and the other, and you say, I don't drink, right?
That's a great
From
point.
that moment
I like
on,
that.
they know that you don't drink. But if you just say, well, no, I'm not drinking right now, right? Or I'm okay. Like, you're still not being, very clear to them. And they just think maybe that, maybe if I ask them at the next event or maybe in an hour or two, they'll say yes, So you just have to be, start to modify some things in the way in which you communicate and let people know. And what I found is that it's taken some time because just like I mentioned earlier, where people bet against each other, trying to get sober, I've had people that I thought were friends. I've had even some family members, frankly, that made the comment that he's never going to make it past this certain point of time. And here I am now over 4 years, and it is a daily thing. Those conversations or comments, there might be some still out there, but most have faded away. So it does take some time.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And since you mentioned that you've been without alcohol for 4 years, could you tell us what led you to make that decision?
Yeah. So it was New Year's Day. New Year's Day 2021. We were in Delaware. We have my brother's ashes, some of his ashes, at this little private beach area. His name is Jimmy, my brother. So it was ironically James Farm. And I went out there that morning on my own, and I actually had a half cup of Bloody Mary. And I'm walking out there, and I'm thinking to myself, I do not need this in my life. Like, this to me is just not something I need to be doing. Life can be beautiful without it. I have been drinking from the age of, 16 or so all the way through until, be 46 this year. So what I was, 40, 42 or so, or 41. I sat there in the sand right next to his ashes that we have buried, and looked up at the sky and just said, look, I need you to help me out. I need you to walk by my side, be with me from this day forward. I promise you, I will never pick up a drink again. Put that drink and the ice, everything into the sand, threw away the cup, walked away, and that was the last time. And, when people think about, who they looked up to every day and they might say their higher power, my brother, he holds me accountable all the time. Sends me signs every day, certain number configurations, things that him and I know about that pop up at random times. And I just, he's there. There's no doubt in my mind. So, just staying true to the path, sticking to my resources. Hey, back to the HOFFA House, when we go there every Monday for dinner and we have a house meeting, that meeting is very important to the residents, and it's very important to me, to be there. I mean, it helps me out with my sobriety as well, to be around, those guys in that moment.
Okay. And would you say you noticed anything that you replaced that behavior with? So what do you drink now?
So a lot of water.
Okay.
In sparkling water. I'm a big fan of the difference. Yeah, Wegmans, I'll put them out there. They got great sparkling water flavors. Grapefruit's my favorite. So that plus coffee. With the HOFFA beans. I'm a big HOFFA beans, every morning I have to have my cup of HOFFA beans, coffee as well. But that's pretty much it. It's regular water, sparkling water, coffee, every now and again an unsweetened iced tea, and that's all I drink.
Okay. And I try to tell people, if you're going to the journey of not drinking alcohol, figure out ahead of time what you're going to replace it with. And there's a big popularity of mocktails right now.
Yes.
That's really on the rise because people like that bubbly whatever, and they don't necessarily care if it's alcoholic. So they have these mocktails, and I'm happy to see the rise of that because that gives people still some sort of a treat drink when they're at an event. That's, maybe not what they're drinking every day.
So am I. And so I'll say this. Mocktails are on the move. Sobriety is on the move. We see that happening, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm very, pleased to see different places that serve alcohol because it's always going to be there, right? You have to live together as one. You can't have, we're in this group over here that are, sober, and this group over here is everyone else that's not sober. Like, no, we're all together, right? So when you see, places growing their mocktail list, to me, that's a good sign for people that might have their, significant other may decide to have alcohol, but you don't drink, right? So it's a good balance. The one thing I'll say, though, is just me personally, I'm not the biggest fan of non-alcoholic beers.
Okay.
Right. And the reason being is not because people say, well, there's a small percentage still in there. It's not that. It's that, that taste of beer, like for me personally, would just give me too many thoughts around, what it was when I used to drink.
Okay.
And I think just the taste of beer in your mouth, even though there's no alcohol in it, to me could be a trigger moment where, you fall right back in again. The mocktail thing, something fruity, something bubbly, something whatever, I mean, that's kind of like my sparkling water, right?
Right.
Put a lime inside of it and, off you go. So, to have those options now in different bars and restaurants, and it's growing, I think it's a cool thing as well.
So our podcast, even though you are located in Maryland, the podcast gets hits all over the country. And there could be someone listening right now who says, this is amazing. I'd love to start something like this in my area. What advice would you give to a listener who says this is a support center that they would like to start in their area?
For sure. So I would say the starting point for anyone out there that is exploring potentially opening up a recovery residence for men or women in their area would to lean into the NAR, that National Association of Recovery Residences. They have a webinar every single month. Like a monthly learning call. Usually it's about 1 hour in length, and you get recovery residences, the owners and operators from all over the countly, plug in and they share their best practices. So, but you can go out to their website, you can see, again, policies, procedures, guidelines, all the stuff, all the information's out there for anyone. But you plug into their calls, you start to learn maybe different organizations that are maybe in your state or neighboring state, connect with them, and just learn, immerse yourself into the educational piece of it. Because you want to make sure you're one, doing things the right way, doing things for all the right reasons to start. You got to have the passion, but just follow that footprint. I've seen folks out there try to do it on their own with limited guidance, right? And, not in all cases, but it can be a challenge for many. So NAR would be a good place to start.
Great. And what could you tell us about maybe your future hopes for the HOFFA Foundation?
Yeah, so one thing that I always like to share with people is that the journey of going from the coffee to the recovery residence was the starting point. And we, for a while there, thought that's what we were going to be. We're going to run this recovery residence and perhaps open up another one at some point in time because it's a big need out there. Never did we see ourselves getting in the middle of transportation. So about 2.5 years ago, our program coordinator, who was our former house manager, the leader, right? We have 2 employees now, him being one of it. He came to us and said, hey, the state of Maryland has a grant opportunity where if we provide or identify a gap in the continuum of care and provide them with a good response, they'll allow us to basically run a pilot. So he said, I've got it, transportation. That's one of the biggest barriers out there. When somebody's ready to get, the help, they're seeking the help in that moment. It's a matter of speed and action, right? Go get them and take them from wherever they are to a facility. So without having any grant writing experience, our program coordinator we put it all together, got the money for the small pilot, ran the pilot, provided the evidence to the state saying there's a gap here. State awarded us a full fiscal year grant last fiscal year, and then a second one in the current fiscal year. So it's July through June. So macro level details around that. Basically, people now can call the HOFFA helpline. We will dispatch a Uber Health driver, and we will take that person from wherever they are, coordinate the entire ride, stay on top of it from point A to point B. And in just over, call it 2 years now, we've provided over 4,000 free rides all over the state of Maryland.
Wow.
Yeah.
So anybody in the state of Maryland can get a ride to the HOFFA Foundation.
Yes. So anyone in the state of Maryland get a ride from wherever they are into a treatment facility, right?
Okay.
Inside of the state. So we're able to, we consider ourselves one of the only organizations that's treatment center agnostic because we work with so many, right?
I love that.
Yeah,
I like that term.
Yes, we are treatment center agnostic. So because we've done tours of the facility, have spoken with them, learned about how they run things, we obviously have, places out there that do a really good job, right? And obviously there's always going to be places out there that, need more work to be done. So with that being said, based on our 2 employees that are in recovery with their experience, they're able to guide that person or the family member that called us on the helpline from wherever they are to the facility where they have to go, right? And make sure they get there, they show up, everything's taken care of, right, from start to finish. So of the 4,000 plus rides over the last couple of years, we've interfaced with over 150 treatment facilities in Maryland.
That's incredible. I can't believe you were able to organize all that as well. I mean, that's an additional layer on top of the program that you are working with.
Yeah, so the evolution of this whole thing, Natalie, is basically when someone asks me today, like, who is HOFFA and what do you do? I start with, we provide a helpline, right, that you can reach out to at any point in time and get the resources you need when you're in a deep, dark place. So they'll call our HOFFA helpline, and it could be either to the transportation section, it could be to a recovery residence, it could be to another resource that's out there, right, for the individual or for the parent. We're just a resource place now.
Wow.
So that's like the overarching umbrella, and then underneath of it's all the other stuff that we do. So just call the HOFFA helpline.
So, and I saved this for the end on purpose because I really want the listener to hear this part, but HOFFA is not based on Jimmy Hoffa, right? Like there is an actual meaning for this acronym. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, so it's close because, many people had nicknames growing up as kids, right? In high school, maybe college, everyone's got a nickname for somebody. My brother, with all of his buddies, they called him Hoffa, right? And everyone knew my brother as Hoffa. And so when he passed and we started the coffee and called it HOFFA Beans, we said, let's make HOFFA an acronym, not a name. So my father, he's like, I got it. Healing, opportunity, free from addiction. Like almost instantaneously.
Wow.
Like he's like, we're all sitting brainstorming, trying to get creative, you know what I mean? And writing all this stuff out. And he just like, boom, nailed it. And from that moment on,
That's perfect.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And I know that the listeners could be wondering, how can they either get involved or donate or support the work that you were doing with the HOFFA Foundation?
Yeah, so best place to start, of course, would be our website. We're out there on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn. But if you go to hoffafoundation.org, that leads you to everything that we do. And then when it comes to support, aside from just a donation to the organization, there's opportunities to volunteer. There's opportunities to provide things, items for the HOFFA House, whether it be in the form of clothing or toiletries or anything like that. There's things that the men need there. So there's a variety of ways you can support the organization, and the website is usually the best place to start.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for coming in today, and thank you for listening to Mental Health and Me. Until next time.
Live radio, local podcasts, the Frederick Podcast Network at listenfrederick.com.